Thank you so much for coming out to my talk on migrating to Angular 5 for Spring developers. My name is Gunnar Hillert. I'm a committer on the Spring Cloud Dataflow project. And so this talk is about the dashboard we have for Spring Cloud Dataflow. And in case you don't know what Spring Cloud Dataflow is, basically it's a toolkit for building data integration, real-time data processing pipelines. So in this talk, I go over our experiences of upgrading from Angular 1 to 5. So in the sessions, you may have seen Angular 4, but since everything moves rather swiftly in the JavaScript world, 5 it is. So we ran into a few issues. I talk about those and also mention a few things of how Angular 5 or Angular fits into your life as Spring developers. Just me, Java Spring developer since 2005. As I said, committer on various Spring projects, do Angular since 2014, kind of like full stack from UI to backend things. DevNexus co-founder, and in my spare time, after moving from Berlin to Atlanta to Hawaii, I'm also a coffee farmer, so if you want to talk coffee afterwards, I can do that too. I just want to get a quick show of hands of where you in your things. I mean, who is doing Angular development? Majority. Who is doing still on Angular 1x? Let's say probably a third. Who is already on Angular 2, 4, 5? Cool. Anybody using anything else like React or? OK. I will fill some of those numbers a little later. Quick demo. The internet gods were not with me, so I cannot do my analytics streaming thing. But just do a very quick walkthrough through the UI where we're at today. So this is the analytics dashboard as it runs today. This is running on Angular. We have basically app registrations for Spring Cloud Dataflow that you can import. We have bulk imports, runtime information, areas where you can create your streams in terms of including visual like a workflow feature. We can also graphically create your streams, and then ultimately also visualization of streams. So we have various support for counters that you can then highlight using D3JS. So literally just a very quick, if you have some more time at the end, I can walk through some little bit more of the app, but I have a ton of slides to go through. So our old stack was basically Angular 1x, started 2013, and amazing of how things get outdated in the JavaScript world. So we had Angular, Bootstrap, Grunt, Bower, if I remember that one, less, NPM, and then we made this rather peculiar decision, premature optimization of using RequireJS for modularization. So the problem is Grunt is dead, RequireJS, yeah, Bower, nobody uses that anymore anyway. So we basically had to, when we upgrade over to Angular 2 or Angular 4 or 5, was basically that the pathway looks like everybody standardized pretty much on NPM as your build tool, and then Webpack underneath. So Grunt, Bower, kind of like transfer over to NPM. The Grunt plugins, in our case, taken over by Angular CLI, which underneath uses the Webpack, And then because Bootstrap everything these days seems to move over to Sass, so less the CSS support then works over to Sass, and for RequireJS you can use the Angular modules, Webpack, so that's kind of like the transition. Just to give you a little bit of picture of how this translates over to where we're at today. The one issue to consider when you migrate is that also like you need to get your, not just migrating your Angular stuff, but also all your libraries your application depends on. So luckily in our case, everything pretty much translated directly into the respective successor libraries, since basically Angular 2, since it's a kind of total rewrite. But we had the busy indicator that goes over to Angular 2 busy. We had pagination support, growl-like status messages, as well as the router. So we kind of like compared to Angular 1. In Angular 1, we didn't use the built-in router, but we had a few more complex routing requirements. So we used UI router, which is a really good routing frame library in Angular 1x. And and with that, we also then, when we considered our migration process, we had expectations. Right? So a big thing for our migration was TypeScript. The benefits of refactorability, classes, have basically like a Spring-like environment with dependency injections. Modernize your stack. Then also take advantage of some of the reactive features Angular 2 provided. And also like having a simpler setup in terms of directives. I mean, I could never memorize all the stuff regarding writing custom directives in AngularJS 1x, so much simpler in 2 in 2+. So with that as a precursor, what options did we have originally when we considered upgrading our Angular stack? Was you have the option to use ng upgrade, right? You can theoretically run both versions pretty much in parallel in the application, provided you follow the AngularJS style guide to the teeth. You have to modernize your old Angular 1 stack. For example, use the Control S syntax, etc., and never use scope, and all that kind of stuff. The next option is you can rewrite or do something else. And we had a few discussions on all 3 of the options. Also, particularly on the third option of using React. So, depending on your environment, maybe if you're totally functional, React might be a good choice for you. So basically consider those options, for you. So I'm not opinionated in that sense. So in our case, as I said, it was not just the Angular that we needed to upgrade, but basically our entire stack was updated, right? Kind of like things swim around. We have to work on a few other things on our project. And so things got a little moldy here and there, and the build processes had to be upgraded. So in that regard, we decided to go for a full rewrite. And as I go on, I also want to highlight a few things that makes it even clearer why that was a choice that worked for us. So it may not work for you, but we made that choice because it was just too much of a change and all over the place. And I think it was ultimately not worth for us to run in parallel, or to make that ng upgrade option work. So when you do start new Angular projects, back in the days when you started looking at upgrading, there was still, there was certainly Angular Webpack Starter. Angular CLI just had come and became a good choice. luckily for us, Angular CLI worked pretty much for all our requirements. I mean, it's certainly opinionated, has its abstractions, even though it uses Webpack underneath, you don't necessarily see it. It worked for us. So if you have really specific requirements that are more complex, take a look at the other startup projects that are out there. Starting Angular CLI projects, that's pretty much it. So once you get it installed, create your project. In this case, define Sass as your styling and put the explicit routing in there, and you serve, and you're good to go. As I said, a big thing for us was TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, and it provides all the good stuff like classes, interfaces. I mean, oh my gosh! I mean, I'm so happy to have classes, right? So, and types and inheritance and generic. So basically, you can basically create your projects in a way that it looks and feels similar. I wouldn't say it's the same, but it is very reminiscent to what you may have on your on the server side with Spring. You have a couple of optional things, niceties as well that Java doesn't have, intersections, union types, etc. So it makes it really, for us and our team, really nice to work with TypeScript. I really like that language. Particular also in the case that it allows us having less of mental friction here, that you can also create like a rich domain model on your in your Angular app. So that was for us a good consideration, because in our old Angular 1 app we did not have domain objects. We basically just passed the JSON we got, and it ended basically directly in the UI layer. So now that you can have, or that we have the options to create nice model objects in our project, you can also, cast your domain objects directly to your domain objects. But what we opted instead was to create explicit domain model objects that we then deserialize into TypeScript. So each of our objects have have the ability to deserialize. They implement. We have a little interface there, serializable, and that way you can also your deserialization or even your validation during those when you deserialize, for example. You can encapsulate that into in your test classes. So so it makes it a little and fairly nice to abstract that away. Also, a couple of domain classes kind of like adopt a little bit of Spring Data type of concepts there. For example, for pagination, we have a little page object, and then you basically keep your items in there, and you have the generic support there. So it's a quite reminiscent to your Spring MVC on your Spring MVC side. This slide I put in here. I don't know if anybody done any Flex work in the past. It's like Flex is not there anymore, but it is reminiscent in that regard that it's if you have those skills or have done work in Flex, or you have people that that have maybe that skill set in the past, it might be an interesting, a good transition piece for those folks as well. Creating those kind of like very rich user interfaces. A companion to Angular, or kind of like one thing you really should make yourself familiar, is RxJS, the ActiveX library for JavaScript. Observable, the new promise. So if you got used to your promises in Angular 1, now it's the time to do the observable thing. Remember to always subscribe, otherwise nothing happens. Mind the async pipe. when you pass those things into UI. And also, a couple of things that came in Angular 4 is kind of like an enhanced ngIf syntax that makes it a little bit nicer to work with observables passed into UI layer. However, for reactive, more reactive on this subject, I would refer you to Sergey's talk right after this session. He goes much more deeper into this. When we did our upgrade, we had a few sticky points here and there. The HTTP library that came with Angular 2 certainly gave us a little bit of grief, since we had like on our security requirements when we basically have an XAuth token that we basically by default the HTTP client sends as a header back to the server for authentication purposes. That was really painful to make that work with the new HTTP library. We got it to work, but ultimately also it got deprecated in Angular 5. So there's a new HTTP library that came out in 4.3 that you should probably use instead. As I said, observable everywhere except when you initialize the app. So there was some issues around that you have to use a promise when you do await. So if you need to bootstrap your app and you really need to do something synchronously, you need a promise for that one. And for Java developers, one thing that was a little bit underwhelming on the TypeScript side is the enum support. So there's enum support in TypeScript, but a little bit on the shallow side. So take a look at TS enums, which has a kind of like Java-inspired implementation for that purpose. And in my slides, I put a whole bunch of links in there. So if you get the slides, you look all those things up. Another pain point in the Angular framework is that it's in many regards somewhat unopinionated, right? So you have, for example, like in form handling, you have the option to use template forms, which are very reminiscent to Angular 1's syntax, and you have reactive forms, so which are seemingly more favored by folks. So so take a look at those. Also, the opinionism or dualism regarding to data binding, I found a little bit of an issue, right? So you have like this kind of like data binding. We all love the two-way data binding in Angular 1 until you have run into performance issues. And you have still pretty much that same thing in Angular 2, but with RequireJS, you also have the ability to handle your state through that. So it's sometimes, I wish there was a little bit more clearer message sometimes of what fiddle your way through what works best for you. And then also sometimes like on our dashboard where we have like multiple objects where we can basically add multiple charts onto our dashboard, we run into a couple of uniqueness issues in terms of how that is being sorted out. So there's a track by for your for loops in Angular, where you can basically, instead of having your equality on your objects, you can basically define that, hey, you have a primary ID basically in your objects that can be used for that purpose. Once we were on Angular 4, Angular 5 came around, of course. And while the upgrade there was pretty much without any code changes on the application level, so there was no changes there. There was a whole bunch of stuff, particularly around AOT. We ran into some issues, some imports for RequireJS that we didn't polish. Some of this was attributable to early adoption, so a couple of things were fixed in a couple of minor point releases afterwards. We ran into a few Node JavaScript heap out of memory errors. So if you come across those, eventually it worked for us, but there's an option to give Node more memory. Also PhantomJS, so something that we used in the old Angular 1 stack. We continued using that in up to Angular 4, but ran into test issues. And basically learned that PhantomJS seems to be deprecated at this point, and there's a headless Chrome now you can use for your testing purpose on CI servers, etc. And also the linting got a little bit more demanding, but overall, not bad. We got the upgrade basically out there. It's not merged in master yet, but the PR's almost done, or is done, but just needs to get merged. And as I mentioned earlier, state management is something you need to consider in your Angular app. So if you have that ability now to create those rich objects in your domain, you want to keep some state in your application, right? We have like lots of tabs. You want to click on the tabs. You have pagination. You're on page 2. You go to the details of your rows, and then you bounce back through the application. You still want to maintain that same state to provide that a good user experience. So in Angular, we kind of like went through that way of, well, you can theoretically, there's a reuse strategy to make your components itself a little bit cacheable. You can, maybe you don't need too much of state management. You just have your components, your child components, and there's some communication back and forth there. We, at this point, do pretty much our state management in services. So there's singletons, and you can constructor inject those throughout your app. And so that's where we kind of, at this point, keep our state for our application. Eventually, we might consider, we were thinking of eventually go to NIX store, which is kind of like implements the Redux pattern that came out of, that's heavily used in React. And so which kind of like abstracts it away into its own little store, and then use reactive RxJS for interacting with that store. So that might be an option. So far, we haven't gotten that route yet. But so state management, keep that serious. That's really something to, that's important. Documentation. We use CompoDoc on for kind of like generate some document. It generates documentation out of your Angular project, and basically it supports the JS doc, and so kind of like it's Java doc on your TypeScript classes. So it's pretty much follows that same documentation mechanism there, and then it also analyzes deeper into your Angular app and is able to render your routes, your components. It provides quite an interesting rendering of your documentation, which is quite helpful and useful. On the integration side, on how to get your Angular application back into your Spring Boot application. One of the constants over the years is the Maven front-end plugin. It really worked well for us. It's still the same as it was under Angular 1. Basically what it does, it downloads, installs Node and NPM locally, so you don't have to have it when you run it, for example, in your CI environment. It executes the NPM, the installation of all your dependencies, and it basically builds the whole project, and then we basically move it into the build results, then go into the resources, public directory. So Boot supports those default paths for where by default it will serve static content. So we basically generate a jar out of our project that basically contains just that static content. And then our Spring Cloud Dataflow server then has that dependency, pulls it in as a jar file, and therefore automatically serves the content, the UI basically. What this allows us, or as also is like basically, for all my development purposes, I literally can stay purely in the node world of development. So I have my Angular CLI, run that development environment there, and then at build time, Maven can basically take it during the CI process and then bundle everything up and deploy to our Maven repository. A couple of open issues now that we, as we move along, that we still have to improve on. I mentioned state management. That's definitely on our plate. Also on the UI layer. Right now we're still on Bootstrap 3 for integrating into to have this kind of like pivotal themed theming there, and eventually would love to go over to Bootstrap 4 or another option, Clarity or material design. Clarity is kind of interesting. It's kind of like our colleagues over at VMware. They run it in over 35 product teams there. Definitely worth looking into that one. And then, of course, testing. We have a decent suite of unit tests as well as E2E tests in our project. However, really make also sure that I would love to get, at some point, automatically test across various browsers. So, for example, Source Labs allows you to do that. And then also underlying, we have our workflow library is still a little bit on the heavy side. JoinJS, very good library in the sense that it's free to use to provide that workflow capabilities we needed. However, it still has a dependency on jQuery, Lodash, and Backbone, among other things underneath. So it's a little bit on the heavy side. So we need to look at that one at some point as well. And oh, by the way, how fast the JavaScript world operates is like Bootstrap 4's Flex-based, Flexbox-based, and then there's CSS Grid the other day. So yet another one to learn. General tips. Definitely keep it simple, right? I mean, the JavaScript world compared to, remember the days when we complained heavily about, all those MVC frameworks that we have in the Java world, and how fast everything moves along. JavaScript is like nothing. Makes like the Java world look like a Stone Age. I'm not sure that it's a good thing, though. Keep it simple. Keep current, just so that you're not all of a sudden like so far behind that your stuff doesn't work, or that you have upgradability issues. Follow the style guides that are out there. The Angular style guide is definitely a very good read, highly recommended. The TypeScript coding guidelines, I would probably recommend refrain from imposing your own coding guidelines as much as possible. Follow theirs. Causes less pain, in my opinion. Also, test your stuff against Linux and Windows. The Node stuff is sometimes not as transferable as you think it is, so you run into few issues here and there. The AOT stuff in Angular 2, while it's great in terms of minimizing your production build artifacts by doing this tree shaking thing and removing all this unnecessary stuff, test that it all runs with that enabled. So we run into a few issues here and there that sometimes, particularly during the upgrade, that particularly the production build wasn't necessarily working, even though it worked on your local machine in testing, in development mode. For resources, I would definitely recommend the Udemy course. There's an Angular 5 course there. The guy seems to constantly upgrade it with the latest version. It's like, if you're lucky, you can get it for $10. That was quite good. Pluralsight has a couple of courses that are nice. Particular, John Papa. Follow him. He has some really good material, and yeah, just have fun and contribute to our project. Has been definitely a great experience on our end. We had a couple of developers that, Glenn, for example, right? Like we throw him onto the project, and with his Spring knowledge, he was easily. People are, at least on our side, easy to transfer or learn, pick up the Angular stack. So there's definitely, in terms of going between UI and the server side, particularly in this full stack type of scenario, it worked really well for us. So I hope if you go that route, it will work for you as well. So, but have fun, and thank you so much for coming out. And if you have any questions, yes.
Do you use some tools for managing code quality? Something that's like SonarQube maybe for that?
Not. I don't know. Is there anything for SonarQube there? That one I'm not sure. What we did is the Angular CLI comes with a whole bunch of linting rules. So basically there's a little bit of enforcement of code quality. So particularly like around imports or things you shouldn't use, or like source code, formatting, all that kind of stuff. So there are a couple of things that are highlighted there. The nice thing having TypeScript that catches a whole bunch of things as well. So. Yes, so we have like a couple of code coverage reports. So we run those, and then run also the build on against Windows and different environments. But SonarQube, I'm not sure. So yeah, that's probably as far as it's get. We have like also like dependencies that since stuff gets outdated so quickly. So we have a couple of. I forgot which exactly we used. A couple of them on out there where it basically checks your node dependencies. So stay current in that regard. So, but yeah, not in terms of like full-blown project analysis as what SonarQube does. So at least I'm not aware of. Yes. So that's kind of like our. I would love to get eventually also there in our environment, right? So we kind of like rely on polling, etc., to basically update the client side. So what I would love to get it to is also that we kind of like have a more messaging style notifications and updating the application, push stuff down to the client. So I tested a little bit, using sock.js. The WebSocket support we have, passing the messages around, definitely works, right? Like so that definitely works in Angular 2. It just haven't gotten around on the server side how to implement that. So that's a feature we need to look into down the road. Yes, what you can do on the Spring side is Stomp.js. Have you looked into that? So that's probably, when I looked, it's still like the best option that's out there. So for a while, it looked like it was kind of like I think it looks like the development picked up again on that project. So so that's probably the best choice of passing messages and then integrating with the messaging support we have on the server side and push those messages down to the client. So that's probably the best. Yes?
Do you do any modern data when you develop your method? How do you get modern data?
We do have, for our unit test, we usually just have a couple of inline JSON we use. We have a couple of mock services that we set up in our project. So nothing like, I wouldn't say super complicated or super fancy. We also use the test bed support. So you basically, one nice thing in Angular 2 is you have basically the ability to create like a test bed. Think of it like a mock MVC type of thing on the Spring side. So it has a very similar feeling. So we can basically almost create like a mock application of the Angular stack and run basically interact with the dependency injection and all that kind of stuff, and run your test that way. So it's it's the test bed. So that's probably the thing to look at. All right. Oh, yes. So Spring Cloud Dataflow UI, Spring Cloud. And all those links are in the slides. And these slides are also already on SlideShare. So get the slides from there. Have questions, ping me. A couple of links there. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming out. And